It started like any other quiet afternoon in our neighborhood, birds chirping, kids riding their bikes, sprinklers clicking on lawns. But within hours, that peace was shattered. I got a call from my dad, and the moment I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. He sounded broken, like someone had ripped a part of his soul away. When I got to his place, I saw smoke still rising from the trash bin at the edge of his yard. Inside it, I found what was left of his Marine dress uniform, charred, blackened, and nearly unrecognizable. My dad, a proud veteran who served this country with everything he had, stood there silently, staring into the ashes. That uniform meant the world to him. It wasn't just fabric, it was his identity, his history, his honor. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, had apparently flagged the uniform display in his garage as unsightly and a violation of community standards. Without warning or a chance to respond, they sent a crew to handle the issue. And just like that, years of service and sacrifice were tossed in a barrel and set on fire. I couldn't believe it. I tried to stay calm, tried to go through the proper channels. But the more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't some accident. It was personal. My dad had stood up to the HOA before over unfair fees and stupid rules. This felt like payback. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the Glock I kept locked away. I wasn't planning on doing anything reckless, but I knew I needed to be ready. Not just for me, but for my dad. They crossed a line. And I wasn't about to let that go. But what happened next? Let's just say, things didn't go how anyone expected. My dad wasn't just some guy flying a flag for show. He served 2 tours overseas, spent years away from his family, and came home with scars. Some you could see, and some you couldn't. That Marine uniform was more than just fabric. It was the only thing he saved from those years. He didn't wear it to brag. He hung it up in his garage with pride, next to a folded flag and a photo of his unit. Every time I visited, he'd nod toward it like it reminded him who he still was inside. The HOA had never liked my dad. He wasn't the type to play politics or smile just to fit in. A few months back, they fined him for his grass being too dry during a drought. Before that, they wrote him up for having a ladder leaning against his shed for more than 48 hours. Petty stuff, over and over. But this, burning his uniform, this was different. It wasn't a ticket on the mailbox or a warning letter. It was personal, and it felt deliberate. When I tried to get answers, the HOA board acted like it was some kind of mistake. Miscommunication, they said. An unfortunate enforcement error. But no one could tell me who gave the order. And conveniently, the security cameras near my dad's house had been under maintenance that day. Yeah, right. I started asking questions around the neighborhood. That's when people started avoiding me. Some looked nervous. A few told me quietly that this wasn't the first time the HOA had overstepped, but no one ever fought back. It was like they were afraid. The more I looked, the more I realized something else was going on. This wasn't just about a uniform, it was bigger, deeper. And if I was going to get justice for my dad, I had to be ready for what I might uncover next. As I kept digging, things started getting weird. One of the neighbors, Mr. Halbrook, a retired electrician, pulled me aside one morning while I was outside my dad's place. He kept looking over his shoulder before he spoke, like someone might be listening. He said the HOA wasn't just about keeping the lawns green and mailboxes matching. According to him, they'd been pushing out homeowners for years, mostly older folks like my dad, using fines, false violations, even legal threats until they sold and moved out. Then, the houses would somehow end up in the hands of a property group tied to one of the board members. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I heard, the more it made sense. Around that time, I started noticing a gray SUV parked across the street whenever I was visiting. Never the same driver. No plates. On the front. Once I tried walking over to ask if they needed something, and the car just pulled away. Fast. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but something about it felt off. Meanwhile, my dad wasn't doing great. The uniform being destroyed, it broke something. In him. He stopped going out, didn't answer most calls, barely ate. And that crushed me more than anything. He survived war zones, saw things no one should see, and yet a group of neighborhood bullies in collared shirts were the ones to finally shake him to his core. I tried reaching out to the HOA formally. Emails, voicemails, even showing up to one of their closed meetings. They refused to let me in, said I wasn't a homeowner and had no right to attend. But I wasn't letting that stop me. I knew I had to find out who exactly gave the order to trash the uniform and why. Every time I got close to someone who might talk, they backed off or suddenly had nothing to say. Someone was pulling strings, and I was just starting to see how deep it all went. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Even when I wasn't at my dad's house, I'd see that same gray SUV in my rear view. One night around midnight, I heard gravel crunch outside my apartment. I looked through the blinds, and there it was again, parked under a street lamp, engine off, just sitting there. I grabbed my phone and took a few photos, but by the time I stepped outside, it was gone. That was the moment I knew this had gone beyond just an HOA issue. This was something bigger. I went back through the HOA board members' names and started researching them one by one. That's when I found something strange. One of the board members, Ted Rollins, had ties to a real estate development company that had been buying up homes in our area for years. Always at a discount. Always after a homeowner voluntarily moved out. I dug deeper, pulled property records, and saw my dad's neighborhood had more than a dozen homes transferred under similar circumstances. I started documenting everything: emails, fines, neighbor statements, property sales. I wasn't sure yet what I was building, but I knew I needed proof. I bought a cheap body cam and started wearing it whenever I visited the neighborhood. I even caught two men snooping around my dad's backyard one night. They claimed to be city workers checking the fence line. No ID, no clipboard, just matching jackets and bad lies. When I pressed for names, they left without another word. Then came the letter. No envelope, no return address, just a folded piece of paper left on my windshield. It read, "Stop asking questions. Some things aren't worth the fight." That was it. That was the line they crossed. This wasn't just about a Marine uniform anymore. It was about corruption, intimidation, and a group of people who thought no one would ever stand up to them. But they were wrong. A few days after the note, I got a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. The voice on the other end was low and nervous. He didn't give a name, but he said he used to work for the property group connected to the HOA. Said he saw my online posts and knew what had happened to my dad. At first, I thought it was a setup, but then he mentioned details, specific HOA meeting notes, internal memos, even the exact date the board voted to handle the veteran display issue. That's the phrase they used, veteran display issue. Like my dad's service was just some kind of nuisance they had to clean up. Then he dropped something I wasn't ready for. He told me this had happened before. 2 years earlier, another veteran a few blocks over had his military memorabilia seized during a so-called garage violation cleanup. The guy tried to sue, but the case quietly disappeared. No one knew why. No news coverage, no trace. And a few months later, his house was sold off for half its value. The man moved away, and no one heard from him again. That changed everything. I asked the caller if he had proof. He paused, then told me he kept a flash drive with copies of documents, emails between the HOA board and the real estate group, pressure tactics they used, and a full list of target homes. My dad's address was on it. So were a dozen others. He said he'd give it to me, but I'd need to meet him in person at a diner outside town. No phones, no cameras. At that point, I wasn't sure who I could trust. But if what he said was true, then this wasn't just some crooked HOA board. It was a full-blown operation, preying on vulnerable homeowners, especially veterans and the elderly. And now, I was in the middle of it. With no way back, I showed up to the diner early, sitting in a booth where I could see the door and the parking lot. I left my phone in the car, just like the caller asked. My heart was pounding the entire time, running through every possible outcome in my head. 15 minutes in, a guy in a plain hoodie walked in, late 30s, looking over his shoulder before sliding into the booth across from me. He didn't say his name, just pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket and slid it across the table like it weighed 100 pounds. "You didn't get this from me," he muttered. On that drive home, I stopped twice just to make sure I wasn't being followed. Once I got back, I locked the door, pulled out my old laptop, and plugged in the drive. What I found was worse than I expected. Internal documents showing how the HOA board worked with a shell real estate company to force homeowners into selling. They flagged minor violations, escalated fines, and then used legal threats to get people to sign over their property. Veterans, retirees, single parents, they were all targets. There were even screenshots of group chats between board members, laughing about problem homeowners. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. News crews parked outside the HOA building. Neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak before were finally telling their stories. Fines that had crushed families were now being investigated, and several homeowners who had been pushed out were starting legal proceedings to reclaim what was taken from them. The documents from that flash drive became the backbone of a much larger investigation, and while not every question got answered, the truth finally started seeing daylight. As for my dad, something in him changed the day the story aired. For the first time in months, he walked out to the front yard with his head high. The community, the same one that once avoided eye contact, now waved. Some even apologized. A group of local vets came by and offered to replace his Marine uniform. But instead of hanging it back up, he decided to donate it. He said it was time to let it go and focus on the future. He didn't need a uniform to remind anyone of who he was. I stayed involved, helping families understand their rights, helping them push back where they'd been too scared to before. The new HOA board was made up of people actually from the neighborhood, people who wanted to protect it, not profit from it. And while things weren't perfect, the fear that had hung in the air like smoke was finally clearing. But Janice Keller was never found. The FBI took over the case once they realized how wide her operation stretched. Offshore accounts, fake names. She was smart, too smart. And part of me still wonders if she'll show up again, in some other town, with a new name and the same cold smile. Still, we did what we could. We stood up, we told the truth, and we made sure people listened. That's what matters. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this is that silence helps the ones who abuse power. Speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it feels dangerous, is the only thing that makes change possible. So yeah, they burned my dad's Marine uniform, but they couldn't burn his legacy. And they sure as hell didn't break us.